Do you know someone in foster care? Have you been in foster care? Do you have a child in foster care? Are you a grandparent or relative caring for a family member? Are you considering becoming a foster parent? Then tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on WNOV 860 AM to engage in thought-provoking conversations with families and providers about child welfare services, both locally and nationally. Together, we can save our children.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine, and we have some great guests in the studio with us today. We have Ron Fancer from Milwaukee Area Technical College. We have from the Right Path program, Marty Ordonez. We have Shirley in the studio, a longtime friend of Fresh Start Today, Dr. Ramel Smith. And on the line, we have from Wisdom, the executive director, Mr. David Liners. Good afternoon, you all.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing well.
That's great. I can hear you now. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about how to break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. How to break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. Before we go there, I just want to make a few announcements because we're going to have a really intense conversation, and the last 15 minutes of the program, we can open up the phone lines. If you'd like to participate, you can call 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. So until then, just write your questions down. We're eager to hear from you. But before that, I just want to make a couple announcements. One is that May is Foster Care Month, National Foster Care Month. And we just want to give a great shout out to all of those providers who sacrifice their time and their energy to provide love and support to some of our most vulnerable children in our community, being foster children. I think it's kind of goes without saying that sometimes people just don't know what we go through on a day-to-day basis, as providers. It's not just dealing with some of the issues that the children are presenting with, but some of the issues that the birth family have, and then you have systemic issues, but foster parents are a valuable resource to our community, so we just want to give a shout out to all of them. And the next thing is that Department of Children and Family is hosting their second annual Foster Youth Graduation Celebration on June the 29th at the Governor's Mansion. Have any of you all ever stayed at the Governor's Mansion?
No, sir.
Well, I stayed at the Governor's Mansion about 2 years ago, and they put me in a little bitty bed in this room. It was like half the size of a twin bed, and it was cold in there, literally. So I said, next time I'll just stay around the corner. But anyway, so they're going to be honoring all foster youth and adults who will be graduating by the 29th of June. So if you want more information, you can contact the Department of Children and Family. You can reach out to the Bureau of Milwaukee Child Welfare. I'm sure they'll be able to direct you. Or you can call Fresh Start Family Services at 414-351-1100, 414-351-1100. So we're talking today on the show how to break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. For those who are listening out in the audience today, there are over 4.2 million children in the country currently who have one or both of their parents incarcerated or under the supervision of corrections. That's a lot of children. And in addition to the trauma of this loss, these children face tremendous uncertainty in their living arrangements, relationships with their family members, financial stability, just a plethora of things that impact these children's lives as a result of having incarcerated parents. Sometimes they perform poorly in school. There's acting out, acting in behavior, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's also a widely known fact as it relates to foster children that there's quite a bit of foster children who are in the system's care, and they have at least one or both of their parents incarcerated. And so we talked about some of the effects, but we want to talk today about what can we do to address this issue of intergenerational incarceration. Just because a parent is incarcerated, does that have to be the destiny or the outcome for the child?
No,
I don't know.
It does not.
You don't think it does?
No, it does not. As long as the child is in a loving home, as long as that child is educated, as long as that child has the support of not only the foster family, but other family members, and they can push forward through the education, I think that they'll be okay.
And I'm glad you brought up education, because that's why we have Right Path here today. because we're going to be talking about some interventions, things that can help break that cycle. And we know that education is key. And whether we're talking about with biological family settings or in a foster care setting, education is the key to keep folks out of prison and out of jail. I believe it was Percy Pitzer from Creative Corrections Foundation who said that for every year that a child is educated, it normally reduces the chances that that child will become later incarcerated. So we'll talk about the impact of education in terms of how it can counter incarceration or second generational incarceration, but also too we have David Liners from Wisdom on the line, and he's going to talk about from a policy level what needs to be done. And surely you are here today so that you can talk from a family level what can be done, because it's going to take us operating on all of these levels to counter second generational incarceration. So Dave, I want to just throw this question out there to you all. Is there a public policy on mass incarceration in America? And if so, who suffers the most? So,
sure. There's not one policy. There's a lot of policies. There's a lot of bad policy out there. And who suffers most are African American folks, poor people, the folks who basically suffer the most at the hands of everything else. It's a whole variety of things. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One is the so-called war on drugs. We're just locking up people left and right, but for the very same crime. If you're African American, you have like a 40 times greater chance of going to prison for the very same nonviolent drug crime if you're African American than if you're Caucasian. So there's all kinds of ways. One of the really simple things we can do is just simply stop locking anybody up for nonviolent drug crimes. If they have a problem, if they have an addiction, they need treatment, and it's a whole lot cheaper to get people into treatment. But to somehow think we're going to fight the war on drugs through incarceration is just adding to the problem. So one really simple thing we could do would be simply to say we will not lock people up anymore for nonviolent drug crimes, and we will have drug and alcohol treatment on demand for anybody who needs it. That would keep a lot of folks out of the system and with their family. And even imperfect parents are often better than no parent at all. And if the child can see the example of a parent who's actually getting help to overcome their problem, that can make a huge difference. So that's something right at the very front end that we could do, and we could do right now.
Now, David, you are the executive director of Wisdom, and that's a statewide coalition of faith congregations whose primary focus is on prison reform.
Yes, so we're a statewide group. The largest, oldest member of Wisdom is Micah in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And criminal justice reform. We work on other things too, immigration reform, trying to promote transit, things like that. But criminal justice reform is the biggest thing we do.
Now, I was reading a local publication, the Shepherd Express, and I typically don't pick up the Shepherd Express, but I was kind of glad I did, because I saw on last week or this week that the front page had an article that is connected to what we are talking about today in terms of mass incarceration. And in that particular article, and I quote what they posted, that you said that you believe that we are at a tipping point with mass incarceration, not only because taxpayers are seeing that the high cost isn't resulting in safer communities or safer society, but because incarceration has hit so many homes beyond the central city. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So there's a couple things in there. One is just simply that the cost is getting huge. I mean, as of a couple years ago, we spend more taxpayer money on prisons than we do on the whole university system. And that's just, people are realizing we can't do that. We're having to cut back money, apparently, on the university system because of the fact that the prison budget keeps going up. And there's no correlation whatsoever between incarceration rates and public safety. And you can look at other states. Minnesota has half our incarceration rate, and they have basically the very same crime rate that we do. It goes up when ours goes up, it goes down when ours goes down. Has nothing to do with how many people are in jail and prison. But the reason I think we're at a tipping point, besides people being sick and tired of paying for it, is the fact that with methamphetamine, you get a lot of rural white people who are suddenly getting caught up in the war on drugs and in prison. And now with heroin, you're getting a lot of suburban white people. And all of a sudden, people are starting to see what's going on and starting to see what an ineffective solution it is. Now, we really have to work real hard for people to understand that what's true for their kids is true for our kids in the city as well. But I think people are starting to say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Why are we taking people who have a problem and giving them a much bigger problem? Why don't we just help them fix the problem?
Now, you talked a little bit about how we're moving dollars. We're cutting spending, or we're cutting, removing dollars from the budget for education, but we're increasing the budget for the Department of Corrections. And I believe, was that $57.4 million that was put into the budget for 2015-2017, or that's proposed?
No, for the Department of Corrections, it's more like $1.3 billion a year.
That's what we spend annually as taxpayers.
Yeah, right.
But what's being proposed from the current administration is to increase that budget by $57.4 million.
Right, and what they originally tried to do was actually to reduce it by moving some things out of the Department of Corrections budget and putting it in other budgets to make it look better. But then they still came back and had to increase the budget because there's just so many people in the prison system. And frankly, the administration has things they could do too. One of the things we're really concerned about is the whole issue of revocations. When somebody's been in prison and they're out on supervision, 3/4 of the people who get sent back to prison, who get revocated back to prison, it's without having committed a new crime. It's just because they broke a rule. They failed a drug test, or they missed an appointment, or they left the county without getting permission first. We're sending all kinds of people back, and that's something the administration could just change their policy on in a minute. And it's things other states already do. So yeah, it's unbelievable what we're doing.
Well, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, because somebody out there in radio land may be wondering, okay, what does this have to do with child welfare? Well, there is a well-established, well-known pipeline that runs from foster care to juvenile corrections to adult corrections. And so it's impacting a large percentage of folk who are listening to this program, indirectly or directly. So that's what it has to do with foster care. But just in general family settings, we feel this. So let me ask this question to you, Dave, and others can chime in. Mr. Pitzer, Percy Pitzer, who is the founder of Creative Corrections Foundations, Marty. I saw a clip that he had on the news in some other state, Kansas or somewhere yesterday, and he said that it is cheaper to send a youth to Yale than it is to jail. Why are we spending more money on corrections versus education?
I'll give you my real short answer. And remember, I work for a faith-based group, and I really think that it's a spiritual, moral problem.
Okay.
I think we look at a lot of our youth and kids, and we don't see them as children of God filled with potential. We see them as problems, and we see them as a danger. And we treat them like a problem, we treat them like a threat, instead of treating them like people who actually can make a difference in our world. And I think that's why we're willing, as a society, not as individuals, but as a society, somehow we're willing to spend this massive amount of money to keep people in cages rather than to help them develop their potential as human beings. I think the very first step is that we just have to open people's eyes and say every child who's born has a potential to do great things, and we all also have things wrong with us that we need some help with to get fixed. And we need to invest in our people, not just invest in protecting ourselves from them.
I got
Once we start to see every child of color as a threat, then we start spending enormous amounts of money to keep them away. And that's how we get into this. And I think it's a spiritual problem. I don't actually think it's a public policy problem.
Okay. Well, if you're just now tuning into this program, you're listening to Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine, and we're talking about how to break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. We will open up the phone lines around 3:45 p.m. Until then, please write down your questions, or you can Facebook us, you can tweet us, and we'll try to incorporate your suggestions into this conversation. And again, welcome to all of my guests on the panel here today. In 2014, there were approximately 4.2 million children who had incarcerated parents or parents who were paroled. And what I would like to know, Dr. Smith, is what challenges specifically does that present for children themselves, for the communities in which they live, and the systems that are designed to serve them? Example, education, child welfare, mental health communities.
Yeah, well, I mean, thinking about Malcolm X's birthday was yesterday, and when you go back to the community of Islam with the Muslims, they said that the mom is the first teacher, the mother is the first teacher. So whenever you start talking about the home, you're looking at the the place where a child is given their birthright. And so you talked about, is this nature, is it genetics, is it nurture? Well, it's a combination.
Okay.
It's genetics, and it's also a nurturing standpoint. So yeah, there's some things that you're going to have a genetic predisposition for, but there's also some things that you get from nurturing. You look at it from a biblical sense. You talk about a hireling versus the person who's the owner. Mm-hmm. So anybody who owns and takes this child as their own is going to look at it different than someone else. So you say, well, what does all of this have to do? The home is the place where the person gets love. The home is the place where a person is taught. When a person is separated prematurely from this place right here, now you're going to put them in hands of jeopardy where you don't know. We all are happy and excited. This is Foster Care Month, so we salute all of those foster parents who do go above and beyond to help out these needy souls. But we also know that all of foster care is not good. So when you start to look at where we put these children in jeopardy, one, we take away the first protectors who we know would have an innate love for them. But two, we put them in a separation, as we talked about before on the show. There's an attachment period. So when a child is removed from a situation that is not natural, there's an attachment that's affected. So even if a child is given a place of love, when it's attached from its natural caregiver, you're already talking about changing brain cell structures and things of that nature. When there's an attachment issue, it's hard for a child to not only attach to a person, but to love and to respect authority figures. Now let's fast forward this a few years later when we go into the school system. Well, there should be a homeschool bridge that works in unison to allow the education process to function normally. But now we have a child who's not with his biological parent, or not with both biological parents. We put them into a school system where now they are acting out. They do not attach to the parent, even though, to the teacher, though the teacher may be useful in some sense. And what are we looking at? We're looking at a child now who is misunderstood. We're looking at a child now who's being given all false types of labels.
Absolutely.
Because as David has said earlier, he said we have to look at all of these childs. It's not, is this child smart, but how is this child smart? And I think often, so many times when we have so many difficulties in the classroom, teachers are quick to remove them, not because they don't love or care about them, but they don't have the time. So then you start talking about the pipeline. It's not just about foster care, but it goes from special education. So we go from special education, then to the juvenile correctional facility, to the adult correctional facility. And going back to your point, your first point, it's all about that nurturing structure. We talked about the importance of the early years of development. Unlike any creature on this earth, you look at a giraffe when it's born, it comes out walking. Mm-hmm. It's almost ready to go. You look at a cow, it comes out walking. No other creature on this earth, like a human baby, is so much dependent upon its caregivers. And if the child is not given the proper, not only nutrition, but love to nurture and support it, you're already building it at a slant. Now we look at Italy, at the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and that's how you look at a child, almost in a sense. So you say, is that child destined to go to jail? The answer is no, it's not destined to go to jail, but you do put them on a trajectory and a path where they don't have all of the advantages that they have. So they have many obstacles that they have to hurdle that some children don't have to.
Well, let's talk about this natural home environment, because, and we've talked about this on the show before, that the three most dangerous environments for children is home, school, and church. Mm-hmm. Home, school, and church. So when we start talking about criminal behavior, children aren't born criminals.
No.
But sometimes in a family setting, a natural family environment, there is deviant, anti-social behavior. So let's talk about the social learning theory. Where are they learning the behaviors from, good or bad?
I think we have several places where they're
Okay.
learning, because obviously the family is the first thing. And when we talk about a social learning theory, this is just basically a theory that posits that children learn through observational learning. So what they see, what they hear, and what's around them. So not only do we have the family behavior, but we talk about homes. If it's not fully guarded, what is the child being exposed to through television, through media, through hearing things, but also through the community in which they live? What is the common ground? I know where I live, it was just very common for us to be very physical, because that was just the culture of the area. So we grew to be physical. I think if I had grew up in a different environment, I had not been there. However, what I did have was I had people who loved me to help me to learn how to move around certain situations, and also how to deal with other situations just from a physical. Now, if I had not had that, I would have learned this was the only way to deal with the situation. So when we go into the whole realm of social learning, what we have to see is that children are very observant. They're very clear on what they see, but because the brain is not fully functioning, what they interpret and what they read and understand can be a little slanted and different. And if you don't have an adult to clearly explain to you, you can see something but not fully understand it. So even seeing physical play can translate to just physicality in all situations, not having that emotional equilibrium to understanding the time and a place for everything. So when we talk about social learning, everything they see, it's the old saying, monkey see, monkey do. You're just playing this song on 860, lum, de lum, de la. When you get that, what you see is what you see is what you're going to act out and what you're going to do.
But you would agree that our home environment is very influential in terms of teaching us behavior strategies, how to make decisions. It cultivates us, it grooms us, it shapes us, it prepares us to deal with the world, to respond to the world. That home life is very critical.
Exactly.
Okay. So somebody chime in. We're talking about how to break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. Who wants to explain what is intergenerational incarceration?
Intergenerational incarceration to me is when family members become incarcerated, be it mother, father, be it father, son, be it whatever it is, cousins, uncles, aunts. That's intergenerational incarceration.
And when I worked in the prison, it wasn't uncommon for us to have a senior, a junior, and a third at the same time. So when we talk about
three generations.
So it's just having more people in your family. We talk about in church, you talk about generational curses, things that go down, pass from generation to generation. And intergenerational incarceration is having a family member previously held. And they said that children that have parents incarcerated are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated. So to answer your question,
what are the chances? Yeah,
you don't have to go to prison, but the likelihood becomes greater when that's in your social learning.
And for children who are in foster care who have an incarcerated parent, their chances are even greater than the child in the general population whose parent is incarcerated.
Because they face so many additional risk
exactly.
factors.
So Shirley's our special guest today. Tell us a little bit about your family's intergenerational incarceration experience, just in a nutshell. What happened?
Ooh. Well, approximately 25 years ago, my son was incarcerated. And approximately 6 years ago, his son was incarcerated.
Okay.
And my feeling is that one of his son felt so deeply about that situation with his father being incarcerated that he had no method or means to cope with it.
Okay.
There was no psychological help. I can't speak for what went on in the home that he resided in, but I do know that when he was with me, we would talk and I would try to pull out of him what is making him so angry. And behind him going to prison, oddly enough, it seems as though he's found a semblance of peace.
By going to prison?
By going to prison.
Do you think, because I think there was one very interesting element or piece of your story, your experience, your family's experience, was that this son who went to jail, the grandson,
yes,
he was actually incarcerated at the same facility as his father.
Yes, they were. For a period of time.
For a period of time.
And that was a wonderful thing because they really got to talk and to know each other, because that communication while my son is incarcerated, it wasn't being completed.
How old was he when his father went to jail?
He was, oh my goodness, he was at least one.
He was at one, so he really didn't have a relation.
He wasn't there.
Okay.
He wasn't there.
He wasn't there. And so were there challenges when they now have been reunited in this facility? Were there challenges to that relationship? But you say he found peace.
I say he found peace.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the challenges that they ran across was to get the full understanding of why his father was in prison and why he should not even be there. You understand? But it bonded them a little bit closer together, but at the same time, they're father and son, but now they're two men. They're two men.
Okay. Well, we're going to go to break. And when we come back, we're going to finish this conversation on how to break intergenerational incarceration. We know that it's impacting so many families in our community, be it birth families, foster families, adopted families. You can join this conversation around 3:45 p.m. We'll be right back. Good afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine. I have a studio full of people, and we're just glad to have our guest on. We're talking about how to break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. Feel free to join this conversation in about 15 minutes by calling 414-444-5250. Now, Shirley, you were talking about your son going to prison about 25 years ago. Then your grandson went to jail 6 years ago, and they were prison, and they were incarcerated at the same facility, but it was kind of like a peaceful thing where your grandson found peace because he had been estranged or distanced from his father, but he saw his dad as a child, but then now they're grown men.
Right.
Dr. Ramel, you were saying something offline that I think had a lot of substance to it. Can you talk about that from a modeling aspect? What was going on there, you think?
Yeah, you go back to your social learning theory, what you see is what you want, and then we talk about children and the connection that they have with their parents, and what we look at is you want to be just like your mom, you want to be just like your dad, and I think it's an even stronger bond for a male. And so if my dad played football, I have a likelihood to want to play football, one, to please him, but also because I want to be him. But if it's a college, I want to go towards college. If it's the armed forces, I want to go there. And oddly enough, strangely enough, even if it's incarceration, if my dad was a gang member, was the toughest gang member, my dad was the biggest drug dealer, my dad is incarcerated, I still want to emulate him. I want to be him because we want that self-approval. So even though we say, well, how would you want to emulate that behavior? Even if the parent themselves are saying, don't be like me, you still have that genetic connection where you say, I want to be like him. And as I was telling Miss Shirley, one of the biggest punishments of prison is not the 6x9 cell. It's not the nasty food. It's not the lack of resources. It's the separation of your family and your loved ones.
Absolutely.
And so if you have your loved ones in there and you have a minute to go there, it gives you a different type of peace that you didn't have before. One of the old sayings is when you're in jail, your family is doing time with you. So when you have the ability to be there and share that time, it becomes, in a strange sense, it's a discomfort. It's a dysfunctional way, but it's a comfortable environment in a dysfunctional setting.
Go ahead.
Okay, let me comment on what you just said. When your loved one is incarcerated, so are you. I cannot tell you the number of nights that I have felt like I was right next to my son and then my grandson. That's something, it just tears you apart because there's nothing you can do except talk to God about it and be at peace with yourself.
And so we talk about that secondary impact. There's a term they have, but it's secondary something. But there is vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. And so how did that incarceration from a parental standpoint, because, I don't know if folk in child welfare America, let me put it that way, if they really understand that when we take in children who already have a number of issues going on with them, but then they have a parent who's incarcerated and that child begin to act in and act out. Act in might be depression. It might be performing not well in school. There's a number of ways kids can act in. They internalize it. But then there's acting out, which is the destruction of property, which is walking out of school, hurting other people,
having
the
been
aggression.
A foster parent.
Right, okay, and having been a foster parent, that we have to deal with that. And sometimes in caring for this very sensitive, vulnerable population, we become traumatized.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering from a birth parent perspective, How did the incarceration of your son and grandson impact you?
Wow. That is my only son. And he and his father were not close. So actually, right now, it just kind of takes my breath away.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard.
Do you still deal with it?
I still deal with it. I will deal with that until the day that he walks out of that institution. And believe you me, 37 years is a long time.
Mm-hmm. A lifetime.
It's a lifetime. Just to hear his voice can make my heart skip. When I worked, I would take off work because I had to see him. I had to touch him. Mm-hmm. I had to smell him. Mm-hmm. This is someone who came from me. Okay. That I carried, that I loved and nurtured and helped him along his path.
Did you ever feel that you were the cause?
Of course I did.
Okay.
Of course
we call
I did.
that false guilt with good
False
parents.
Of course I did.
What didn't I do, even though
What
they did
should
everything?
I done?
Mm-hmm.
What could I have done? I tried to get him involved in organizations that
programs,
AFY, he loved football. I tried to get him involved in writing. He's a very prolific writer. I tried to get him, but without that daddy there, it was a little more difficult.
Okay.
Because that's just mama. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mama be all right.
Now, if you feel that way as a birth parent, it brings so much. I feel it, I sense it, and so I approach it from a foster parent because sometimes we provide some good care to this vulnerable population, and we run into these youth several years later, they've been in and out of jail. We find out that somebody that we've poured so much into is now incarcerated. Sometimes we walk away feeling like, wow, did I do something wrong?
I think, I'm sorry, but I think one of the things that we need to understand and come to an agreement with is not only do we have to provide that nurturing and that loving, we also have to look into the mental health aspect.
Yes.
We need to get some therapy. When we have these foster children, we need to keep these foster children in therapy and keep them talking and keep them guided in the proper
But even
manner.
birth children, because your son
Us
has
too.
siblings, and sometimes in dealing with your grief and your trauma, the siblings get left behind.
Because when he was going through his trial, there was things going on around me with my other two children. I was so caught up in that,
Okay.
I couldn't see that.
And that's a lot of folks' reality that's listening to this program right now.
I couldn't see.
No, we're going to have to make a shift. Dave, is there anything that you would like to contribute to this conversation at this point? Because we're going to be talking about the Right Path program and some of the interventions that can help break the cycle of intergenerational incarceration. Is there anything like you like to share?
Just, again, to reiterate, we really have to invest in our kids. And you're right, kids who've been through trauma really need some intervention, and we need to be willing to even spend money on it if we need to spend money on it. We really need to step in. We can't just assume that kids are going to be able to break the cycle all by themselves. So that would be the biggest thing that I would say. And the other is that, we also have to acknowledge that kids are going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some kids, they make a mistake, they get corrected for it, they get redirected onto the right path. Other kids just, they just lower the boom on them. We just need to deal with every kid as if they were, the children of privilege and deal with everybody that way.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Dave, for being on Fresh Start today. Hopefully you'll be able to come back and talk to us a little bit more about what you're doing around this work in reducing mass incarceration here in the state of Wisconsin.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Now, Marty, you're from the Right Path program. Can you talk a little bit about what is the Right Path program?
Sure. The Right Path program is one of two programs that was created through that foundation that you talked about, Creative Corrections Education Foundation. From the foundation, there are two programs. One is a college scholarship program, which gives, it's a national program that gives college scholarship money to students who are attending a four-year or 2-year college who have a parent or guardian who was either incarcerated or on parole.
Okay.
Thus far, in about 2.5 years of existence, 77 students across the country have received scholarships in the area of $1,000. Yes.
And in Wisconsin, you all just had one of those recipients actually complete their degree.
That's correct.
Right here from Milwaukee.
Yes, actually a very famous person. Christopher Scarver, for those who are listening and remember, is the gentleman who killed Jeffrey Dahmer in prison, and Jesse Anderson.
Right.
Christopher Scarver's son just graduated on Saturday from Bethany College in Minnesota, and
I talked to him yesterday. That was really great. So we want to give a shout out to him for that accomplishment.
He's the first graduate from the Creative Corrections Education Foundation program for college kids, and Mr. Pitzer that you were talking about. Was at his graduation on Saturday.
Okay. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the program does is giving money and support to adults between the ages of 18 and 25 whose parents have been incarcerated or who are parole. Caller, you're on the line with Fresh Start Today. You have a brief comment or question?
Yes, I have a brief comment. Well, I've been in prison before, and my son's mother has been in prison before too. So when I got out of prison, I tried my best not to parent my son out of guilt. And now my son has turned against me because his mother got out of prison and she's parenting him out of guilt. And because she's parenting him out of guilt, he's allowed to do everything. And he's ended up in prison, in the exact same prison I was in. We was the best of whatever, father and son, when, while she was in jail. But when she got out of jail, all hell broke loose. And I mean, everything broke loose. All of her kids just went haywire. It's because she opens up the door. They can bring stolen TVs, stolen cars, guns to the house, girls, whatever
anything
whatever
goes.
They want to do, it's all good to go.
So anything. But let me ask you this question: how many years were you incarcerated when you weren't there with your son?
6 years, 8 months.
6 years, 8 months. And what was the relationship like with your son while you were incarcerated?
She never did bring him to see me.
Okay.
But the day I got out of prison, I had got full custody of him the same day. Same day I went and got him, and everything went all smooth, stuff like that, because she had literally just given up on all of her kids. But now she's gotten out of prison, and like I say, everything goes whatever they want to do.
Okay.
One of her sons was on the news. He had got killed, and she had the audacity to be mad at the person who did the killing, but she wasn't mad at herself. You got a son 13 years old, and he had a house party at 1 a.m. on a weekday, on a school day. Of course, you can be upset the dude who killed your son. But you have to be mad at yourself by being a parent and saying, I shouldn't have let my kid out there early in the morning or late at night.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for tuning into Fresh Start Today. We appreciate that comment. Keep listening to the show. And let me ask you something, Marty. So when we look at what are some of the, Mr. Pitzer indicated, Percy Pitzer from the Creative Correction Foundation said that he was a warden for over 30 years in corrections. And he has seen thousands of children walk through the doors of visitation rooms. And he said he could just single out which ones were going to be the next client. Are there any specific signs that parents, and any of you can chime into this, that people can look for, behaviors, attitudes, dispositions that will be an indicator that this child is heading down the path that we don't want them to go?
Well, there are a number of signs.
Okay, give me 3.
That one can see. Withdrawal.
Okay, withdrawal, isolation, yeah.
From the family.
What about activities that they like?
Activities that they like. Well, in some instances.
Okay.
Because, some kids are just...
So withdrawal, yes.
Withdrawal. Alcohol and drug abuse.
Alcohol and drugs, okay.
And
can I add one?
Yes.
Disrespect towards authority figures.
Yes.
Disrespect toward authority.
I think that's the biggest one where you look at.
Okay, so let me ask you, Shirley, for your grandson, did you see some of these signs in your grandson?
Yes.
Okay, we have a caller on Fresh Start Today. Caller, you have a brief comment or question?
Yes, I have a comment.
Sure.
What I like to say regarding the disposition of our progeny and their...
Is this Chris?
My name is Christopher.
Oh, Christopher, I'm sorry. I just remember you so long ago. It's been a while since you called in, sir. How are you doing?
Fine, by the grace of Allah, the Most High, and thank you for taking my call.
Anytime.
And I'm nobody of extreme importance by no stretch of anyone's imagination, let alone my mind. So I'm just providing a comment regarding.
Okay, yes, your comment is?
My comment is this: when it comes to our progeny and us and in our entirety, if we look at it overall, and if we involve our Christianity, supposed or imposed.
Chris, we got about 15 seconds. I'm
Okay.
sorry, because we're about to go off the air pretty soon.
Yes, sir. Here it is. Our children are not the way that they are by it's not by a magic occurrence. They are the way that they are because their parents were not appropriately prepared to perform accordingly. And so therefore they did not have the ability to pass on that which they did not themselves possess. And here we are in a situation that's out of control because all of us have rejected the truth that will actually empower us as a nation of people in the United States.
I got your point. Thanks a lot, sir.
Let me comment on this young man's statement. First of all, no parent is prepared for children. No parent.
We didn't get a manual?
No. Well, if we got one, mine got lost in the mail. And every child is different.
Every child is different.
If you have 5 birth children, out of those 5 birth children, you have to have 5 different personalities to deal with each one of those children.
All right, caller, you're on first.
Let me add one other thing to that, too. And it's not just the parents. We also have to look at a dysfunctional justice system that we have. Because, yes, in our state of Wisconsin,
there you go.
Black men are 12. We lead the nation in incarceration rate. So when we talk about 1 out of every 12 black men that's going to be incarcerated, I mean, it's, we're talking about ridiculous rates. And when you compare that to 1 in 31 with whites, when you talk about the Native Americans, you talk about our Latino brothers and sisters that's locked up at disproportionate rate. So it's not just about the parents because we see dysfunctionality at all levels that exceed demographics and SES, but certain sex groups are locked up at a disproportionate rate.
And I think what you're referencing, and caller, if you could just hold on, we're going to get to you. I just want to make this comment. I think what you're referencing is that study that came out of UWM back in 2010, 2011.
Yeah, it was
right, from the University of Milwaukee Employment and Training Institute report that indicated Wisconsin disproportionately incarcerates more black men than any other place in the country, and more than half of Milwaukee County's black men in their 30s and 40s have been or currently are in prison, and particularly in the hot spot, the ground zero, as they would like to say, zip code 53206, which I was raised in 53206.
Since 1990, it's tripled. The population of men have tripled. We've had over 26,000 black men matriculate through the prison system. 20,000 have been re-released, but when you re-release, as David had said earlier, you recidivate for so many different reasons that's non-criminal wise, and the majority of those individuals were in for non-violent crimes.
Let me tie it to child welfare so we can get this program paid for. So with 53206 zip code, there's a high detention rate in 53206, 53212, 53205. Those are some 53208, 53210. We can just go down the list. And 67% of the Milwaukee child welfare's population client base are African American. So if 80% and 70% of inmates in certain jurisdictions like Orange County and Cook County, when they were surveyed, they indicated that at one point in time they were in foster care. This is a foster care related issue. Caller, you're on Fresh Start today. You have a quick comment or a question?
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great.
Mostly everything starts at home.
Yes.
And I work with a lot of the youth. And before they're 11 and 12, you can't really tell. They go one way and then they start acting another way. And it's all about the crowds they hang with. By the time they get 16, 17, 18 years old, you can pretty much for sure know if he's in the jail, on his way to jail, or jail's going to be his destiny. So it really starts at home with when they're young. And if the parents don't pay too much attention to them when they're young, then just about anything can happen to them.
Thanks for that. That's a very valid point.
God bless you.
One thing I want to say, I want to talk about the spillover effect when it comes down to education. And Marty, the young folk that you're working with who's coming into your program, who are privileged to have the services that you all are offering at Right Path program, what are some of the basic challenges that you see that they're presenting with from an educational standpoint when they come through your doors?
Well, the students that I have are 18 to 25 years old.
Okay.
Many of them, most of them, haven't been in school in many, many years. Oftentimes they did 1 year or 2 years of high school. So they don't even know how to be a student any longer. So they're coming in with a lack of discipline to be a student, and Ron knows this as well. They're coming in with every one of the social issues that we have today: homelessness, hunger,
Yes.
mental illness,
Mental health,
AODA issues. You name it, they're all coming in with some or many of those things. And so part of what we're trying to do is just create a stabilized environment so that when they come to school, they are.
But there's those broken pieces, those missing pieces, those foundational pieces out there. And so you all have to really work to help build that.
We're doing everything we can to
Whatever you
address
do.
what we have to deal with.
And we do that in a variety of different ways through the educational system, and most of all, it is the challenge of making sure this population feels a high degree and level of self-worth.
Self-worth.
Self-worth. So through the various educational programs, the mentoring programs, our Men of Color initiative at MATC, all of these programs, Right Path, are the foundation of them are taking this population.
I need to enroll in Right Path right now today. You got an application?
Population, this foster care student population, and increasing their self-worth and constantly letting them know that they are a person of value, they
Yes.
have value, and that they can achieve at a high level.
So that's Ron Francis from MATC. He's a transition specialist, and he can be reached at 414-297-6184. So it's not just educating, but it's also a psychological mental health component that you have to somehow engraft into your curriculum in order to reach this population.
Most definitely, from the instructors to the maintenance staff to the public safety staff,
Great.
to every individual within that educational institution. Every time these students come in contact with someone, that idea or feeling that you are a valued person must be forefront of every encounter.
So let me ask you this. How many foster children do you know or adults who are formerly in foster care have been a part of your program? Do you have an idea, or is that something that you all look at? Or
are you speaking of Right Path program?
Right Path program.
I don't know the answer.
Oh, you don't? Okay. But some of the same risk factors you talked about, outcomes, you say homelessness, mental health issues, hunger issues. These are a lot of things that children who age out of care or young adults who age out of care have those same type of issues. Let me ask you this, and Dr. Smith, you can kind of chime in on this. What are the educational consequences of children of imprisoning their own mothers and fathers, as well as the mothers and fathers of other children in the schools they attend? So if I'm little Johnny and my mother is in prison or my father is in prison, how does that not only impact me, but the students who are also in my classroom?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just about readiness. So when you talk about, like, from a psychological standpoint, Abraham Maslow, hierarchy of needs, he says there are some basic structures that every individual need. You need food, you need shelter, you need love, you need air. If these things aren't met, you can't go on to the higher structures what we would put in as far as the educational realm. So saying that to say this, if little Johnny is in school and mom is in prison, I haven't eaten, I don't feel love, when Mrs. Johnson is trying to tell me something, I could care less what she is saying. I could care less about Ralph and Annie and Brittany and all of of the rest of the kids in class. So my oppositional behavior when I'm acting out is now affecting their ability to learn, because now Ms. Johnson has said we're not going to have recess. We're not going to go to gym. We're not going to do A, B, and C because the class is off task. And you often hear parents say, I don't want you hanging around that kid right there because what? This person teaching you how to cuss. This person teaching you how to fight. This person is doing that. So when we see a person, specifically a younger individual who's just acting out because they're lacking certain things, don't have the self-worth, as you mentioned before, they bring that negative vibe, and not to their own detriment. It's not their fault, but when they bring that negative vibe, it does become contagious.
Okay, if people want to get in contact with Marty Ordonez over at the Right Path program, they can call. How can they reach you, Marty?
The phone number is 465-9538. And can I have 30 seconds?
30 seconds, yeah.
30 seconds, because I haven't even talked about the Right Path program.
That's
Right Path program is for 18 to 25-year-olds who dropped out of high school, never completed. If they come and have a parent or guardian who's either incarcerated or on supervision, if they come to the program, they can get their tuition paid for, their books paid for, their fees paid for. They can get a biweekly stipend for being in class and a bus pass. And the whole idea behind this is, again, if we give students an opportunity to educate themselves, it's a far better alternative to going to prison. And
Go over that the eligibility criteria one more time.
18 to 25
okay.
must have a parent or guardian either incarcerated or on parole or probation, and have not completed high school.
Now, can they be an individual who have had some run-ins with the law?
Absolutely. Some of the students we have are on supervision themselves.
Can I ask a question? How does that work if they have an IEP for the ones who are 21 and under? If they had some special education needs, are the services there also?
Yep. Accommodations can be made through MATC.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. That's great.
And programs like this Right Path are so extremely important because there is a push within this country to limit the access of higher education.
Okay. We're about to have to go off the air, but that was Ron Francher. We got to give Ron a call at 414-297-6184 to learn a little bit more about what support and assistance that MATC can provide. But some of the best practices in ending the cycle of intergenerational incarceration: connect with your child, pay attention to them. Every child needs a supportive relationship with a caring adult. There's tutoring programs in our community, mentoring programs, and then also what I love about the Creative Corrections Program, Right Path program, and kudos to the House of Corrections because it allows for parents to take their money while incarcerated and give to this foundation to help educate their children so their children won't end up where they are at today. Thank you all for being a part of this forum. You've been listening to Fresh Start Today. We'll see you on next week.